Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's RTPI Scotland event, which has been hosted by Dumfries and Galloway RTPI chapter. My name is Shona McCoy, and I'm convener of the Dumfries and Galloway chapter. I'm also team leader for Dumfries and Galloway Council's local development planning team. I'm joined this afternoon by Mike Staples, who's the manager of South of Scotland Community Housing, who were formerly Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust, Jakob, Kaye, Community Development Officer from the Nith Valley Leaf Trust, and Matt Bridgestock, Architect and Director at John Gilbert Architects. They're all going to give us a presentation of the project, Scotland's first community-owned passive house scheme in Closeburn. And I think, as we said in the advertisement, that the project recently won a SURF award for best practice in community regeneration in the housing and regeneration category. So this afternoon's presentation should last about 30 odd minutes, which will leave us time at the end for questions and discussion. The webinar is also being recorded and will be made available on the RTPI's YouTube channel, and the session is due to finish at 5 o'clock. So please use the question box to leave a question, ask a question, and we'll try and get through them all in the time that we have. If we don't have time to answer, the panellists have said that they're happy to provide an answer after the session. So I'll now hand over to Mike, Jakob and Matt and let them carry on with the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Shona, and good afternoon, everybody. I am going to share my screen if I can. Robbie, are you able to make me presenter, please? Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm hoping you're all able to see this. Closeburn Passive House project, which is Scotland's first community-owned passive certified homes, and Jakob from Nith Valley Leaf Trust, the community organisation, and Matt from the project architect are going to join in with me as we go through this this presentation to kind of take you through the story of the project. So my organisation, South of Scotland Community Housing, we have been around since 2006, originally, as Shona said, Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust, and we're essentially an enabling organisation who provides long-term support to community-led housing across the south of Scotland. And for us, and within a Scottish context, that's very much about affordable housing within the wider remit of land reform and community ownership of land and assets. Our work, which is really illustrated well by this project, is about determining, assessing local needs and targeting solutions that meet these needs, but also a key issue for the south of Scotland around rural repopulation. So to us, working in partnership is absolutely imperative. I've listed some of our partners there, but you know, what we do is really hangs heavily on partnership at a local level, with Dumfries and Galloway Council, regionally with the Economic Development Agency, nationally, and the support we get at a UK level from the Nationwide Foundation, who invest in community-led housing and support. So a lot of our work is about that wider impact of community ownership and setting housing within the context of the impact it has around creating more resilient, sustainable communities, more pertinent than ever now, post-COVID. And again, I hope a lot of that's illustrated by this project. So community-led housing in Scotland, as I said, it's about that context of community ownership of land and assets, and it's underpinned for us by a legislative environment around community empowerment, particularly asset transfer that you'll hear about relative to this project, Scottish Land Fund is a key aspect of the Land Reform Acts, and the Scottish Government's Rural Housing Fund, which up until now has been the only piece of affordable housing grant in Scotland open to community organisations. The Scottish Government's new housing strategy, Housing 2040, which was published in March, has extended the Rural Housing Fund now for another 5-year period. Just to mention very quickly, the way we work as an organisation is to work with communities around all aspects of project planning and development through to delivery over a long period. And I think probably this project we've been involved with now for 5-6 years, all the way from the very outset of the idea through to delivery. And I'm going to pass over to Jakob and ask him to tell you about Nith Valley Leaf Trust.
Right, thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. So yes, the Nith Valley Leaf Trust is a community development trust looking after the parish of Closeburn. A bit about Closeburn is it's a very rural location, kind of along the main road, the A76 road, about 14 miles north of Dumfries. Its community council is about 650 people, with 250 living in the village. Hopefully the film a bit later kind of gives you a picture of what it's like. It's just got a small school, small shop, and there's a lot of socially rented houses. So in 2016, the Nith Valley Leaf Trust did a community action plan to identify the needs for the community. Housing was raised as quite a significant demand for family-sized homes. So that's when we engaged with the Dumfries and Galloway Small Community Housing Trust, now the south of Scotland, with Mike. So they basically supported us to try and work out how we can build some community-owned housing, but with the additional ambition to try and make them as energy efficient as possible, even higher standard than standard housing. So it entered into very interesting conversations which were happening before my role started, between Mike and Matt Bridgestock, who's here as well, John Gilbert Architects, to see if we could make an affordable passive house home development, ultimately to try and give the tenants lower bills, but also to improve environmental impact. So it was a really exciting project to get involved with at that point, which is a couple of years ago now. So we basically, I got involved at the point when the funding was coming through from the Rural Housing Fund, and to finalise the funding elements. So we got funding from Foundation Scotland, SSE Clyde, Scottish Land Fund as well, and Annandale and Nithsdale Community Benefit Company. So it was basically putting together as much funding towards it as possible to reduce the amount of loan that we needed. However, we still have a mortgage with the Ecology Building Society.
Jakob, can I just stop you for a second, because you're kind of telling us the entire presentation before we get there.
Sorry, go for it.
Do you want to say anything else about Nith Valley Leaf Trust just now specifically, and about the action plan?
Well, the action plan, yeah, obviously identified the housing needs, and that was, I guess, why we went into discussions with yourselves, and we have other projects on the go, but this was a very ambitious one for the trust at the time.
Cool, thank you. So Jakob's touched upon this, but we had been working with Nith Valley Leaf Trust for a while, and an interesting aspect of this project was that we had already done a very small scale single house project with Nith Valley Leaf Trust in 2016, and I think a lot of the confidence that came into doing this project was driven by already having all the kind of infrastructure in place to be a community landlord, and as Jakob said, as we began to come into this particular project, there were a lot of the key driving factors had already come through the community action plan, and were particularly about bringing families in to support the local population, to reverse outward population shift, and to address really high levels of fuel poverty in this particular location where there's no access to mains gas. And all that demand was backed up by work that we did on a localised housing needs and demand assessment at that point in time. That was backed up by quite a lot of work to kind of illustrate where those levels of fuel poverty sat. So as Jakob said, we worked on the project development up to the point of bringing in funding to deliver the feasibility around the site, and a key element of that was attaining funding through the Scottish Land Fund to bring in a project officer, which was Jakob, and I'm going to ask him to speak a bit about that in a minute as well. A community asset transfer, which I mentioned at the beginning of the process through the Community Empowerment Act, related to this piece of land being in the ownership of Dumfries and Galloway Council, having been identified as surplus, was going to be put to the market, and through the community asset transfer process, the community was able to register with the council an interest in taking ownership of the land, presented a business plan for the housing, and therefore was able to receive permission to take ownership of the land for £1. And we then put together this early stage feasibility package that, again, as Jakob mentioned, brought Matt and John Gilbert architects into the equation at that point in time, and we used feasibility funding both from Scottish Land Fund and the Rural Housing Fund to build up the project. So this is the site, which was acquired, partially through community asset transfer, small amount of funding from the Scottish Land Fund, different aspects of where the land is. So it was a very obvious gap site for housing, in amongst other affordable housing development, next to a play park already, so really well positioned for family housing. And Passivhaus, Jakob said that there was a really strong ambition to attain high standards of energy efficiency, and Matt, who is at the helm of all this, is going to tell us a little bit more about what Passivhaus is.
All right, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone. The film is going to tell you a little bit more and put the Passivhaus part in context, but Passivhaus is really an international energy standard, which is looking at how efficient you can make the fabric of the building without adding renewables on to the building. It's simply reducing the amount of energy that you need right down as far as you can, but it's not just an energy standard, it's also a comfort standard. So it's doing that and allowing the residents to feel comfortable and warm throughout the year. So yeah, there's a great deal of rigor in it. There's quite a lot of complexity in some of the details, but the basis is really simple. It's about trying to make rural housing as energy efficient as possible, and you're essentially removing the issue of fuel poverty from these houses for the residents. In terms of current kind of Scottish policy, it's on the way to being zero carbon. It's not in itself zero carbon, but the amount of energy that these houses need per year means that to upgrade them to zero carbon needs a small amount of PV on the roof, to make that transition. It's not just the energy that we looked at in its use. We also looked at the energy in the building and the construction of it, and reducing all of that stuff as well. So the film will give you more details, but that's a bit of an overview.
Cool. Thank you, Matt. So as we said before, the kind of one of the key elements of the closeout of the project feasibility and viability stage was bringing in funding for Nith Valley Leaf Trust to employ Jakob as project officer to take the project through the delivery phases. And Jakob, do you want to come back in and talk through the next slides that talk about how the project was actually delivered?
Yeah, sorry, I got a bit ahead of myself earlier. So yeah, once I was employed and into the offices with Mike Staples to understand ultimately what the budget required, we got some additional funding sources and arranged this mortgage, which I mentioned, which probably is maybe 23% of the total cost. We then acquired the asset transfer. We did some community liaisons around this whole time to make sure that the community understood what we were doing with this land, and also started calling out for applicants as well, and going through the allocation policies, which is really key in this project to make sure that we allocate these houses to the right type of people, which is very different from the way housing associations work, because it's about the connection to the community and to the village. So we did that work at various events, and we did celebrations of the land just before the building work started. We put out calls to local contractors to become subcontractors on the project if they were willing to tender for jobs. And we just basically tried to keep the community very well informed of the concept, and ultimately we got on site just in time for when the building contractors were starting. We got the asset transfer through, big celebrations, and then the contractors ultimately took over. And throughout this process, as we were gearing up towards the completion, which was slightly, in the end it was slightly delayed because of COVID related issues, but we identified, we had 11 formal applicants for these houses, and obviously chose 3 families, which have been in there since almost exactly a year, 22nd of May last year. So yeah, in 2 days they'll be celebrating a year being in there. And some key dates which happened was, I mean, once the tenants were in, we got nominated for a SURF award, which we won for housing and regeneration in February early this year. And we got pretty much the same day as that actually got handed the Passivhaus plaque. So it was all, we got the certification as well. Again, it's been very positive and huge celebrations of all of these achievements. We were amazed to get the SURF award, being such a small trust, never having done anything like this, because ultimately it's theoretically the first community-owned Passivhaus standard home for affordable rent in Scotland. So hopefully other people will follow. And the tenants were handed their keys. And yeah, we're looking forward now. Basically, we're managing the properties, and the tenants are all very happy, as you'll see in the video. Hopefully, that if that works, you'll see some interviews we did with them about how they're getting on in there. Lovely families. In fact, two having 2 more children soon, so we might have to build bigger houses soon. This is something we're gonna have to chat to Matt about. They seem to be doing their job. But ultimately, yeah, we're ongoing. We're looking for more land to try and do more community housing. It seems to really be getting a positive response, and has really boosted the village as a whole and the ambitions of the village with other projects that we might do. So we're looking at an asset transfer potentially of the school playing field, not for housing, but for managing it, working with the school to put some facilities there so the school use it more and so the community use it more. So we're carrying on discussions with Matt and Mike on various projects as we go forward, and hopefully do some more environmentally friendly homes which tackle kind of fuel poverty as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jakob. I'm going to go back just a little bit to share these pictures again of the completed project. and some of the families that have taken up residence that Jakob's talking about. And as Jakob said, a winner in the Housing and Regeneration category of the SURF Awards. So really great for everybody involved. In terms of the key outcomes of the project, I think Jakob's talked, and we're going to show the video, and that really shows the impact in the community. Jakob's talked about that from a Nith Valley perspective. From the perspective of our organisation, we feel it's really formed a strong template to replicate elsewhere in the south of Scotland, and we're certainly finding that other communities know about this project, have had particularly an increased awareness because of the SURF Award, and they're coming to us and saying, that's what we want to do, that's what we want to attain in terms of standards. So the community impact's really obvious in terms of rural regeneration and helping to sustain this local community, supporting local services, giving the Community Development Trust a sustainable future as well, with an asset base and an income that will ultimately be reinvested in other elements of community-led regeneration. The tenant impacts, I think, are most obviously demonstrated through the video, but that community-led response to climate emergency, I think, is really important at the moment. And we were just going to mention here at the end, we've been doing a bit of work over the past 8-9 months, along with John Gilbert Architects, again, into the impacts of COVID upon home from a community-led housing perspective. And this is a lottery-funded project, Emerging Futures Fund, that was all about kind of assessing societal level impacts of COVID, shifts catalyzed by the pandemic, and the emphasis of our project has been to think about how people's relationships with their home and their immediate environment and their community have shifted because of being in lockdown, but what elements are going to shift permanently in the long term, for example, around working from home. And we've endeavoured to address those issues that came up through our research with the production of an enhanced level design code for community-led housing. So together we're still working on that at the moment, and that's something we'd be keen to share with people as we go forward once it's produced. So I'm going to stop there, and we're going to pass over, I hope, to see the film that Jakob really impressively produced himself in advance of the SURF Awards, became like an expert filmmaker in the course of about a fortnight, but it's a really excellent piece. So Matt is going to share that.
Okay. Can you hear it? Yes. Yeah. Oh.
Hi, my name is Jakob Kaye. I work for the Nith Valley Leaf Trust as a community development and housing officer. I've been overseeing the Closeburn Passivhaus project, which you see behind me. The Closeburn Passivhaus homes were developed by the Nith Valley Leaf Trust, a community development trust with charitable status set up in 2009. The aims have been to develop sustainable community-driven projects within the rural parish of Closeburn in Dumfries and Galloway. The village of Closeburn is situated on the A76 road, approximately 14 miles north of the regional town Dumfries, and around 2.5 miles south of the larger village Thornhill. The estimated population of the community council is 650 people, with 250 living in the village itself. Closeburn is an agricultural and forestry area on the Nith Valley. The village has 115 houses, 60% of which are owner-occupied, which is slightly lower than the national average. The amenities comprise of a primary school with 63 pupils, a specialist therapeutic educational facility, a small shop, garden centre, village hall, and church. The Trust also took over the assets of a derelict orchard near the church to establish new fruit trees and edible plants. Work has been progressing towards setting up community growing facilities, educational workshops with an outdoor classroom and wheelchair-accessible paths to grow organic produce, as well as to teach gardening skills for people of all ages. In 2016, an action plan was created to identify the needs of the community. The summary of this survey concluded that the main issues were the lack of housing to rent and that fuel poverty was a significant concern. From the 2016 Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation report, Closeburn had been classified as 40 to 46% most deprived, based on suitability of housing and physical condition. This is based on the proportion of household population that experience overcrowding or are without central heating. Compared to the regional and national rates, Closeburn has 3 times higher proportion of socially rented accommodation. As a result of this action plan, the Trust engaged with the Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust to ascertain what type of housing would be most appropriate to the community.
Hello, I'm Mike Staples, the Chief Executive of Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust. We're an organisation that provides support to community-led housing within the context of community ownership of land and assets, community development across the south of Scotland. And we've been working with the Valley Leaf Trust throughout the course of this project, the tail end of the development of the Community Action Plan and identification of affordable housing as they wanted to address, and we've worked to establish the localised demand to underpin the need for family housing in the community, and brought together the wider funding package for the delivery of the Closeburn Passivhaus. A key strength of the project has been a clarity of objective from day one. The community were determined to deliver upon 2 things: a need to bring additional family housing into the community in a way that would sustain local services, particularly the schools, and at the same time a desire to address climate emergency, and very particularly an evidence base for fuel poverty as a key issue within the local community. These decisions led to a determination from the very outset to deliver upon passive standard housing, and that in turn led to our engagement with the design team led by John Gilbert Architects and working with Stuart and Shields.
So, what is Passivhaus? This concept is designed carefully with consideration for the climate, including solar gain and shading, looking carefully at the placement of surrounding trees and the positioning of windows in relation to the sun. They are insulated very well and carefully to ensure there is no thermal bridging, using triple glazed windows and doors. The building goes through rigorous airtightness testing to ensure there are no drafts coming in, and it stops heat escaping through any gaps. The house is ventilated very carefully using a mechanical heat recovery system, so the outgoing warm air is filtered and recirculated back into the house. With the natural heat given off by household appliances and by human activity, there is generally enough warmth to require a very small heating system to keep temperatures at comfortable levels. The combination of these design principles achieves houses which have a significant reduction in fuel consumption. This also means low carbon emission, well on their way to meeting zero carbon home standard. Grants were awarded from the Rural Housing Fund, Scottish Land Fund, SSE Clyde, the Annandale and Nith Valley Community Benefit Company, and Closeburn Housing Association. The remainder of the project cost was delivered through a loan from the Ecological Building Society. The Rural Housing Fund provided the bulk of the grant in agreement with the fact that the homes will always be rented at affordable levels. The site of the houses on Castle Crescent was part asset transferred from Dumfries and Galloway Council. John Gilbert architects were chosen to design the housing based on their experience and forward-thinking vision of Passivhaus design, working closely with Stewart and Shields towards achieving affordable Passivhaus standard homes. The construction is built simply using high-efficiency materials and maximising the use of timber. John Gilbert architects designed a simple terrace clad in Scottish larch and render with a hint of colour, which reflects the village and rural setting. In the time leading up to the completion of the building works, the Trust called out to the community for applications for tenancies within the new homes. 3 families were chosen through an independent panel who assessed the criteria of each application in accordance with the allocation policy, including housing needs and the connection to the local community. Having moved into the homes in the summer of 2020, we asked them how they're getting on.
Lovely, I love it.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. Still a bit mind blowing sometimes. We come home and be like, this is absolutely
Yeah, we said from first we're waiting for like the owners to come home and be like, right, can you leave now and get out? Like, this is our house. What was I going to say? I was going to say about, if your dad went to one school, went to the primary school, went to Closeburn Primary when it was one school, sorry, and then obviously Connor attended the school, and so now, like, Leo goes to when he goes to school, like when he goes to school, that'll then be 3 generations. I think the knowledge that, like, it's not all of a sudden going to be like, oh, actually, like, you need to get out because we're going to sell the house or we're going to whatever, is a conflict in the. And to know what we see that now, he's going to grow up here in this house. It's nice.
Hello, my name's Sammy and my husband Lee, and we've been married 4 years now. So, Lee's a car salesman and works in the retail and Vauxhall, and he really enjoys that. And I used to work in nurseries, and then I had my 2 young kids, and always wanted to be a childminder then because I wanted to stay at home with them, but I never had anywhere that I could proceed that. Like, no one was willing to let someone run the business from the house. And then the houses we stayed in. But now that I've came here, I've managed to start up, and I've got 4 kids that I regularly look after school. So it's been really, really good. So our housing before we got this house, within a year we got kicked out twice from private landlords. They gave us both 28 days notice to leave with 2 young kids because they wanted to sell. So the first one was in Dumfries and they gave us 28 days notice, and we found a house in Ecclesfechan. They said they wanted a long-term tenant, So we said, great, we'll moved all the way to Quebec, and within 6 months, they did the same thing. 28 days, and the day we got the letter for the 28 days notice, we actually got an eviction letter saying that he was starting eviction proceedings because he'd already sold the house. There was 3 days between us moving out and the keys being handed to the new owners. Because we were in less than 6 months, he was legally allowed to do it and didn't care because we lived in London, so we had to move again. We landed in at my mum and dad because there was nowhere else for us to go, so we were home left, and then we got confirmation that we could get in here, and we were so happy to finally have somewhere that was settled, that's safe, we can't be kicked out, we're not leaving. We don't have to uproot the kids again from friends that have made around the village, and that was really important to me for Chloe starting nursery. Now, I didn't want to have to keep moving if we were in a private rent again. So it's been amazing here to finally feel settled somewhere.
Hello, my name is Kasia. This is my family. This is my husband Pavel and 2 daughters, Tanya and Jakob. I work in care home in Solheim, and my husband works in farm in Closeburn.
It's really good. It's really warm. That's one good thing. It's quite quiet as well. The isolation rules, so it's quite quiet. Yeah.
We are happy this house is safe and bright. It's big, lovely windows, nice view, and close to park. So I could after my younger daughters. Really, really nice. Now we think so will be a lot cheaper because we don't start heating here. It's really, really warm. It's middle of October. It's cold outside, but inside it's really nice.
Yeah, we had around the 15 minutes since we got the house.
Even in the middle of night, even at this time of year, it's not quite the middle. But like, yeah, even at this time of year, to be able to not have to absolutely bundle up, and then as well, like,
it's great. It seems like it's going to be really energy efficient, so if she's not needing the heating on, then that's a big saving from anyone's house. So yeah, it's really, really good.
Hi, I'm Mike Steele from Nith Valley Leaf Trust. The energy efficiency aspect of the houses is very important because it means they'll be very inexpensive to run. In the future, it means that our young people can stay. It means they can send their kids to our school, use our shop, and take part in all the activities like the gala that we run at the moment. So for us, passive houses really, really work.
Oh, right, good. There's the end. Thank you very much. Mike, Shona, is that us? Are we opening up to some questions or discussion?
Yep, if that's the end of the presentation, yeah, it was really, really interesting.
That's it. Thank you.
And I'm really pleased that we managed to get the video to work. So we had quite a few teething problems, so that was really good. We've got a few questions in, so I'll just kick off. So this one's probably both for Mike and Jakob. Someone's asking, how did you work out who the right type of people were to move into the development?
Yeah, okay. I think there's probably 2 parts to that question, and I'll answer the first part and get Jakob to answer the first part. The second part, the first part relates to the funding and the nature of the funding within the Rural Housing Fund, that we need to be able to present a localised allocations policy to the Scottish Government, and that localised allocations policy needs to be responsive to the housing needs and demand work. So that was the starting point of that, was establishing the parameters, which are very much about local links and the people coming into the properties being a good match to the type and size of property. but I'll get Jakob to talk about what that was actually, you know, the process of actually doing that was like. Yeah.
Yeah, very good question. Obviously, we had an allocation policy, which was written up with the help of Mike and Stacey in their offices, which was very much about the links to the community. Obviously, the interesting thing about this particular project is you can't just really have a passive house being used by a single person. You know, it's designed for a family, so that was obviously a very key component, was actually matching it with the correct number of people to make the house actually work as it should. So obviously the number of children and ages of children was also considered within that, to ensure that the house is working efficiently. And obviously the allocation panel made a decision based on a kind of traffic light system, which was independent to us as the community trust. Otherwise, obviously there could be issues around favoritism or things like that. So it was handed to an independently chosen panel. We had 11 applicants, and obviously 3 were chosen. But yeah, a lot to do with, you know, ages of children as well. We want these families to be in there for the long term. So it was also, I think decisions were made upon the ages of children. If they were potentially going to grow out of the house relatively soon, we think, well, actually we'd rather have families that are going to settle in there and really, you know, feel settled there. So it was a combination of lots of points on this allocation policy list.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to kind of follow on from that. You said, yeah, you had 11 applicants for it. And I know you said that you're in the process of looking to buy additional land, but more for community type facilities. Are you looking to maybe develop further housing within Closeburn?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, the joke about this being, you know, a community development officer, we've got 3 happy families, and then, yeah, we've got about 8 unhappy families who didn't get a house. So now, you know, we're actually more unpopular now than we were before. But not really, no. But there is clearly demand. But again, it's very interesting with this post-COVID discover things. We're about to do another action plan, hopefully soon, to assess needs as well, because it's quite difficult to get land. There's no more council-owned land that we can take other than the playing field, and there's no way we're going to start building on playing fields or in the community gardens, but potentially looking at farmland and looking at the development plan for Closeburn. And farmers at the moment, we're telling them, you know, if they want to sell, but they don't seem to want to sell. So it's very hard to even get into conversations about co-developments or anything at the moment. I think that there seems to be a political kind of settling down to do with political issues, Brexit and things like that, to know what's going to happen with the farmland ultimately is all we've got to build on if we're going to. So we're just waiting to see what happens. I think the whole community is, and I think the farmers are also waiting to see what happens before making any decisions.
There's definitely an aspiration to do more, though. I mean, there's definitely a demand, isn't there? Like the demand profiles, you know, for the level of application for the houses, but there was also a lot of demand for housing for older people as well. So next time round there might be the opportunity to look at a slightly different type of end product, I guess.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah, because obviously we're all aware locally that Dumfries and Galloway has an ageing population and predicted to carry on with that trend. So that's interesting, Mike. Thanks. Next question that we've got is probably directed more at Matt. Someone's asking that within the current regulatory framework, how far could a community-owned and ecological scheme like this be scaled up? and what would need to change to go further?
Would need to change to go further. First of all, can this be scaled up? I think it absolutely can be scaled up. I think obviously you need land, but in terms of the passive house, the model and the construction of these houses, we're building projects now across Scotland and Northern England. We've got quite a lot of projects that are now working on the construction model, and you're getting passive house to social housing benchmark kind of levels of cost, which is the important thing. You've got to get the cost right. So it can be scaled up, and it is being scaled up, and that's really important. That's one part of it. How do you go about scaling that up within a community and within a community-owned framework? Probably Mike's best to answer that, but again, there are, as Mike said, there are other communities that are interested in this model, and with the Scottish Land Fund and the Rural Housing Fund both being continued, am I right, Mike? I think they're both being continued. Then the model's there to take that further and to go to other communities and look at other projects of different sizes. So I think that is all there and is all possible. How you join all that up needs someone like Mike to sort that out for me. But that's that's the thing. What needs to change to go further? Well, I mean, I think with COP and the climate change ambitions of the Scottish government and the UK government, I think changes coming in the building within the building regulations. Change is going to be coming to get these to zero carbon in the future. So I expect that passive house is on the route to zero carbon development. That's where I expect it to be. But again, it's about a lot of it is around. A lot of it is around, basically the funding. As I said, Closeburn, to retrofit Closeburn to be zero carbon is around putting photovoltaics on the roof, and it was an early decision that we weren't going to do that. We were going to concentrate on getting the energy use down as far as possible in this project, with that as the option in the future. In the future, we would put those on as a matter of course, but that future isn't here yet. That's the And Mike, have you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think our view is there's loads of potential to upscale this style of delivery, and there's loads of this type of activity going on across Scotland, and particularly in the Highlands. And I think there's loads of potential from a kind of cynical, self-interested perspective. I would say that there needs to be more resource put into the support of this type of project to allow there to be upscaling. There's not a lot of resource at the moment into the enablers, but that would help if there was more pairs of hands within the overall makeup of the support network in Scotland. I mean, I think one of Matt's comment about the funding, the cost and the funding being right, and it's quite a big challenge, because there's grant available to build, but there's no grant available for site infrastructure for community-led housing. So if a site is complex, it's more difficult to deliver, and therefore delivering upon larger scale development becomes more of a challenge. You see, the Closeburn was quite a straightforward site, but still had enough of a kind of site infrastructure requirement to make it difficult around the financial margins of this project. So yeah, I think probably money is the big consideration in terms of upscaling or capacity to upscale.
And Shona, I think it would. You might know better than this, but that I think Closeburn is a success because it has built a small project in a rural area, and certainly the housing. One of the reasons this project exists is that this kind of scale of housing is not something that a housing association routinely takes on. they're looking for bigger projects in order to get rid of, or not get rid of, but reduce the abnormals to a point where it all becomes fundable and things like that. So I see Closeburn as being a real success from the point of view of it is that small scale stuff that is needed in rural areas.
Yeah,
it's been delivered on a financial model that works and can be replicated. Whereas I mean, when you start taking up, and we've got a site in the Scottish borders, which is the same housing model, but it's got a we need to put a substation on it to get 10 houses, and we need to put 250 metre of new sewer in. So the houses are pretty much the same, but the costs are completely different. And everyone's going, why is this so expensive? And you're like, it's not. It's what's in the ground. It's not, and that's in rural areas. Those numbers, those escalate really quickly. That's because the distances, the distance to a sewer is 250 meters, and the distance to the nearest substation is 2 kilometers. And suddenly those numbers are big, I think what Mike's saying about abnormals is it was a relevant thing for rural areas. That's
yeah, definitely. Because I think you said in the presentation as well that the site had been owned by the council, so it came across as an asset transfer. And I think it was acquired for £1. Yeah.
That's,
so
No, we actually paid half the value of the land. The land was valued at 30,000, and we actually contributed 15,000 to the council towards it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a slightly complex story, isn't it, Jakob? Because it happened before the Community Empowerment Act's regulations were in place. So I think if we did it now, it probably would be £1. But we ended up doing a kind of hybrid of asset transfer where you paid half the value for it. But yeah,
right.
I think that's a really important point, and around our ability to deliver projects like this and a bunch of other projects we're doing at the moment is that the support of the local authority is absolutely imperative. You can cover your ears, Shona, while I'm saying this, but if it weren't for Dumfries and Galloway Council supporting us, supporting community-led housing at a strategic level through strategic housing into the Scottish Government, making the site available, supporting through planning in a very proactive, positive way, all those relationships are really, really important. And I think that proactive enabling environment from the local authority we've really benefited from in Dumfries and Galloway.
Well, that's good to hear. I think kind of the role that the South of Scotland community housing play is a really important one. And that, as you said earlier on, there's the role that the larger registered social landlords play, but then there's the role that yourselves play. I think it's incredibly important for smaller communities that are looking for less than 5 units to be developed. So it's that's really encouraging to hear. Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry, Matt, you were going to.
I was just going to add, we speak to a lot of communities, and I think, the interesting thing is all the different backgrounds that the community organisations bring a great deal of value to the project, but on the same token, they also need someone who's been through it before to steady them when things are a bit tense, and to make sure they're on the right path. And I think that's really important, and I think Nith Valley have really valued and got a lot of value out of that through the process. Someone who's been through it before, and that to us makes a difference between projects that go ahead and projects that quite often are very well intentioned and perhaps even funded, but don't make it to the starting blocks.
Yeah, but Nith Valley are now able to share that same perspective with other communities themselves because they've now done it, so and have that knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, that's all invaluable. We've got one more question that's come in. So it's probably primarily again for you, Matt, but the others might want to contribute. So it's about passive solar energy. So they're asking how important is orientation of the housing, facade or roof for passive solar gain, and how well does it work for terraced housing?
So the calculations we do for Passivhaus look at the orientation and look and balance how much sun you get into the house and how much overheating you get in the summer. So we have to balance that. So these houses, we've got this terrace of 3 in Closeburn. We've also got a terrace of 3 that was on the same kind of development schedule in St Boswell's, and the Closeburn ones face north and the St Boswell's ones face south. So we've got the same amount of glazing on both of those houses, but we moved the glazing round so they look different. So the St Boswell's ones has got more glazing on the back of the house and less on the front, and the ones in Closeburn are the other way around because to get the sun. So balancing that up is really important. I mean, we always try and put roofs so that you can put a south-facing roof so you can get PV and sort of, you know, anything in the future. But balancing up the windows. So all of the Passivhaus model, we've got the same, and as I say, we've got it on. We've got 5 sites now, but the amount of glazing is the same on each house. It's just we've moved it around to depending on which orientation it is and, you know, where it is and, you know, the street and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's important, and it's all part of the calculation, and you have to balance it up. I think that's the answer. Yeah. Did I answer all the questions, Shona? I only got the bit about the solar gain.
Yeah, no, I think you answered the points that were in the question. So yeah, no, thank you very much. That's all the questions that have been submitted, and we've only got a couple of minutes left until 5 o'clock when the session finishes. So I don't know if any of the panelists have any final comments or thoughts they want to share before we finish up.
I'm glad that you asked Matt that question. That's just
not a problem, Mike. So it probably just leaves for me to thank all 3 of you for giving up your time this afternoon and coming along and giving a really interesting presentation. Saying at the start that this has been recorded and it will be available on the RTPI's YouTube channel. And if you want to watch the video again that Jakob made, it's on YouTube, I think I'm right in saying. So you can have another watch of that there. So again, thank you all very much, and we'll say goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.